Many of you may already know a little bit about Shankaracharya. His name is associated with Advaita Vedanta. That is the philosophy that he advocated, that he believed in, that he lived. And his story is really the story of living the vision of Advaita Vedanta. What is Advaita Vedanta? It is Vedanta is the essence of the Vedas, the essential vision of the Vedas contained in the Upanishads. And Advaita means non-dual, means that there is only one reality, which is Brahman. So his vision of reality is that all these diversity, all these differences that we see is only an appearance. The truth of it all is just one non-dual Brahman, which is consciousness. So this verse which is on your screen, this is a traditional verse which is stated to give us an idea of what Advaita Vedanta is. It says, Shlokardhen pravakshyami yad uktam granth kotibhi brahma satyam jagan mithya jivo brahmeva naparah. Shlokardhen, in half a shloka, pravakshyami, I say, yad uktam, what has been spoken in Grantha Koti Bihi, in numerous scriptures, in all the Upanishads, in all the Vedas, in all the Puranas, what has been spoken? And what is that? Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya. Only Brahman is real. Now, to understand this idea, of course, it's a long while. Today, we are not equipped to really get into that because the subject matter today is the life story of Shankara. But just to give you an example, uh, just as in a potter's shop, everything, all the different pots and pans are the same clay. In the same way, all this diversity is the same consciousness. So Jagan Mithya, the Jagat is an appearance, and the Jeev and Brahman are not different. We are 10, 20 people joining here today. So on the surface, it seems we are 20, but essentially we are all same non-dual Brahman, the same consciousness. So this was his vision. This was what he lived. He not only, advocated this, he also lived this vision. And that is his story. And what is the source material for knowing about Shankara's story? It is Shankara Digivjaya. This is a traditional text. It's a traditional text, and the word Digvijaya here means conquest in all directions. Basically, if you have some knowledge about Shankara's life, you may know that Shankara went around India talking about this vision of Advaita. And wherever he went, whoever he met, he conquered them all with this vision. There were many schools of thought, and he defeated them all. So this was his Digvijay Yatra, victory of all directions. But it was not his personal victory. We need to understand this. Generally, he is pictured as someone who is going about destroying other schools of thought. That is not how it is. It was the vision of oneness. So he was more of a he was trying to synthesize the diversity, the diverse interpretations which were there of the Vedic scriptures. And he was trying to, propagate this idea of oneness of all beings. That was his main, idea. So it was really the victory of this vision, not of a person. All right. So this is our source text, and it is the most widely read and accepted traditional biography. There are about 10, 10 biographies on Shankara's life, you know, written all over the past 1000 or 1500 years. So many of these biographies are not available. Among those which are available, there are very few which are reliable, and this one, Shankar Digvijaya, is considered most reliable. It is it is held as a sacred text by the Sringeri Matha, by the mathas of Shankara. It is held as a sacred text. They read it every day. So it is, and we call it a traditional biography because it narrates the story in the style of the Puranas. So there is a little bit of mythology in it. It combines history with mythology. So that is why we are saying it's a traditional biography. You know, so, and it is a poetic composition, very beautifully written poetic composition. If one is interested in poetry, especially Sanskrit poetry, one must definitely read it. you know so it is a very beautiful poetic composition inspired by the style of Kalidasa. The writer himself acknowledges that I am attempting to follow the footprints of Kalidasa, and it interweaves history with mythology, like the Itihasas and Puranas. Now, does this mean that this biography is not reliable, or we shouldn't believe in it? It doesn't mean that. This is the style of our culture, of our writings. What it means is that we need to look deeper into it to understand what it is trying to convey. It's a philosophical text. The mythology is really philosophy. So it's a philosophical text, and it is trying to convey something which we need to understand, which is what we are going to see today. So today I will be presenting the mythology as it is, and then I will also give you some perspective over it. And then of course you can interpret it in the manner you prefer. Its author is Madhava, Madhava Vidyaranya. Now this Madhava is not to be confused with the Madhavacharya of Dvaita philosophy. That Madhavacharya is much more well known. But Madhava is a very common name. Even today we have so many Madhavas. So even then Madhava was a fairly common name. But this is Madhava Vidyaranya, and he was an Advaita Vedantin. He was an Advaita Vedantin who studied under Acharya Vidyatirtha, who was the head of Sringeri Matha in the 14th century. And Madhava himself went on to become the head of Sringeri at one point. So what it means is that this text, Shankar Digvijaya, it is a very important text because it is written by a scholar who has complete knowledge of Advaita Vedanta, who has complete knowledge of Shankara's vision. So it does not just remain any person's writing. It is the writing of a person who knows Shankara, even though he's separated from Shankara by a many hundred years, but he knows Shankara's vision. And another very important text written by Madhava is Panchadashi, which is studied by serious scholars of Vedanta, and it also adds to his credibility. The story begins with Devatas going to Lord Shiva and asking him to take an avatar. As I said, it is in the style of Puranas. So, in Puranas, the stories begin like this only. So, the Devatas, they ask Lord Shiva to take an avatar to establish Vedic Dharma. Vedic Dharma, they say, is in danger, and they request Lord Shiva to take an avatar. So, they mention a few points. One of the main points that they mention is that the Bodhas were dominating the scene at that time. If we read the history of our culture, we find that a large chunk of India was following Buddhism. And because Buddhism rejected the Veda, because Buddhism rejected the Vedic ritual as well as the Vedic vision of reality, so in that sense, it was considered as a danger to Vedic Dharma. But within the Vedikas also, there were many issues. Within the Vedikas, people were neglecting Vedic rituals. People were not taking sannyasa at all. This is particularly important in the context of Shankara's story. Okay, because Shankara came to establish sannyasa dharma particularly. So this is mentioned by the Devatas that the Vedikas are ignoring rituals as well as sannyasa, which is advocated by the Vedas. And there were certain traditions of Vaishnavas and Shaivas who were also ignoring Vedic rituals. All right. And then there were also Kapalikas. That was also a certain tradition of Tantra who were engaged in certain immoral practices in the name of spirituality. So all this is going on within the Vedic fold. So all this was also seen as a problem. So Lord Shiva says that Devatas, there are three sections of the Veda. There is a Karma Kand, there is Upasana Kand, and there is a Jnana Kand. So Lord Vishnu has already taken an avatar as Samkarshana, which means Krishna, and established Bhakti, which belongs to the Upasana Kand. Shesh as Patanjali has also established Yoga, which belongs to Upasana Kand. And Kartikeya will take an avatar as Kumarila Bhatt to establish Karma Kand. And thereafter, Lord Shiva will take an avatar as Adi Shankaracharya to establish Jnana Kand, along with it sannyasa. Now, what does this mean? What does this mean? First of all, if we look at it from a very traditional point of view, the idea is that whenever there is a great personality like a Patanjali or like a Kumarila Bhatt or like an Adi Shankaracharya who has some extraordinary knowledge, some extraordinary skills, then he cannot be an ordinary person. He has to be an embodiment of some divine power. That is the traditional way of looking at it. And from the point of view of our story that we are going to see, this whole exposition, this whole introduction, what it is trying to establish is that the very purpose of Shankara's life was Jnanakand. The very purpose of his life was to revive the Jnanakand of the Veda, and along with it sannyasa. Because when Shankara takes sannyasa at a young age, the ordinary person is unable to understand it. So when this background is given that he is an avatar whose purpose in life is to revive sannyasa, then perhaps the ordinary person is able to make peace with it. And of course, when their knowledge develops, they are able to understand it much better. So, Lord Shiva is to take an avatar as Shankara. This is the beginning of the story. Now, when we talk about the birth of Adi Shankaracharya, there is no surety about his date of birth. I'll present to you various views on this matter. The standard date, which is accepted in academic circles by scholars, is 788 AD, which was given by Max Muller. And this is a fairly good assessment. It's not a bad assessment. He has given his reasons for it. But if we look at the traditional accounts, especially maintained by Sringeri Matha, then they date him much further back in the 1st century BC. So that is the traditional dating of Shankara. But in recent times, even the academic circles and the scholars are, going a little back in the date, and they have given better assessments. Uh, the 1st century BC may not still be very plausible because Shankar has mentioned certain scholars who lived in the 5th and 6th century AD. Like he mentioned certain Buddhist scholars, Dinnaga, Dharmakriti, and so on and so forth, who lived in the 5th and 6th century AD. So if they lived in that period, then Shankara has to be their contemporary or after that. So all these things are there. The dating in Indian history is all mithya. It all depends upon some other date, which depends upon some other date. So if one date is proven wrong, all the other dates fall apart. So dating is, I feel, I mean, it's like it's not really that important. Uh, the traditional date on which we celebrate his Jayanti is Vaishakh Shukla Paksha Panchami, which is going to be in a month's time. That is when we traditionally celebrate his Janma. In the Shankara Digivjaya, there is no date mentioned. All they say is that it was an auspicious moment. Shubh Lagna. Lagne Shubhe Shubh Yute Sushuve Kumaram Shri Parvativa Sukhini Shubha Vikshitecha, means just as Parvati Devi begot Kumar Kartikeya, in the same way Jaya Sati Shiv Guroh Nijtunga Samste Surya Kuje Ravisute cha Guro cha Kendra. In the same way, Shiv Guru's wife, Devi Aryamba, gave birth to a child at an auspicious moment when all the stars were very propitious, when the sun, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars, they were all in ascendance. So, in this manner, they give an indication of when he was born. Perhaps through Jyotisha, we can arrive at some clear conclusion from this description. The picture here is of his Janma Bhumi in Kaladi. On this matter, there is no debate. On this matter, that where he was born, where he spent his childhood, there is no debate at all. It is a well-known fact that he was born in Kaladi in Kerala by the Purna River, which is known as the Periyar River now. And his place of birth has been turned into a monument, of course, which one can visit. It's a very beautiful and very quiet place, and it's near the Vrishchal hill with the Shiv temple. This Shiv temple will play an important role in his story. His father was Shivaraj and mother Aryamba. We call her Aryamba because Amba means mother, so we add that. And they were a Nambudri Brahmin family. Again, on this point, there is no debate that Shankara was born in a Nambudri Brahmin family. So it is a well accepted fact. And as it happens in the Puranic stories, the parents are unable to have a child for a long time, and they do some tapasya. They worship Lord Shiva at the Shiva temple. And then Lord Shiva appears, pleased by their tapasya, and he says, okay, I'll give you two alternatives. Either choose a child who lives a long life, but who is ignorant, who does not know Atma, or you choose a child who lives a short life, but who is a Brahmagyani. So again, something like this we have heard before in the story of Markandeya and in a couple of other stories as well. The idea is that when a Brahmagyani is supposed to take birth in a family, the parents need to be prepared. The parents need to have some kind of vairagya, and they have to choose. So to indicate that, this is often said in such stories. So of course they choose a son who is a Jnani, and Lord Shiva accepts, and therefore Shankara is born. These images I have taken from one of the TV shows that they recently made on Shankara's life. So Shankara was a very prodigious child, very intelligent child. By the age of 3, he had mastered the languages, the kavyas, the Puranas, and everything. And, again, we find this idea mentioned in the stories of many great personalities. Uh, it is very well known that Shankara took sannyasa in childhood. If he did take sannyasa in childhood, and his writings reflect his deep knowledge of Sanskrit language, of the Puranas, of the Kavyas even. So it means he had mastered them at a young age. So when they say these kinds of things, it is not really an exaggeration. It is not really an exaggeration because we find the evidence in his writing itself. His father passed away when he was 3, and so he was brought up by his mother, and his mother sent him to Gurukul at the age of 5, and within 2 years he mastered the Vedas and the Vedangas, and he returned home at the age of 7. So again, we find the evidence in his story, in his writings, that he had complete knowledge of the Vedas, of the Vedangas. He had perfect knowledge of grammar. He had perfect knowledge of the different layers of Vedic literature. Nothing was unknown to him. And then one very important incident occurs in his life. which seems like a very small episode. If you read the Digvijaya, you may even miss it. It's so tiny, but I feel it's a very important episode. The episode is that once Mother Aryamba is going to fill water at the Purna river. Purna river was far away from Kaladi at that time. So mother faints in the sun, and Shankar is very deeply concerned about his mother. So he worships Lord Krishna, and he asks him that if you can bring the river to my town, then my mother will not have to go all the way. So Krishna agrees, and Purna river comes to Kaladi. So this is the story which is traditionally told, and that is why Purna river is flowing in Kaladi today. This is the Krishna temple which is maintained in the premises. Why I find this story important is that it shows that Shankara really cared for his mother. He had deep concern for his mother. Because later, when he asks for sannyasa, it seems that he doesn't care for his mother. But stories like this, they bring out that it was not that he did not care for his mother. He did. But the purpose of his birth, of his life, was something more. So, in that sense, this story is important. Then comes the chapter where Shankara takes sannyasa. The story goes something like this, that once four rishis come to their home. Among them is Agastya Rishi. And Shankara's mother shows them the boy and says, Rishis, this child is very intelligent. Please look into his future and tell me something about it. So the Rishis, they look at the child and they say, yes, your child is a Jnani, but he's not going to live for too long. So perhaps mother had forgotten what Shiva had said. So she starts, weeping, and she's very sad about it. So at that moment, Shankar asks her for sannyas. So Shankar says that this life is very fragile, as that of a silken flag tossed and torn by strong winds is the condition of the extremely fickle life of man. This is the English translation of Digvijaya. So he says that, the physical body is here in this moment. It will not be in the next moment. Who knows? It is so fickle. It is so, uncertain. That is why they say it is mithya. Something which is not there the next moment is not here even now. So, depending upon the physical existence will only give you sorrow. And as for our human relationships, they are also transient, they are also, just for the time being. He says, how many children have we looked after? How many wives and husbands have we married in the course of our repeated births and deaths? So if you think about it, if you just read this, it will give you some sense of vairagya. If you really, believe in this vision, that all the things that we are holding on to, all the entanglements that we are, tightly holding on to, they are not really our reality. The mother and the father and the children and the spouse and everybody is all relative, is all for the time being. So there is no point being attached to it. And so he says, those who live the life of the world, means those who live in this mithya, considering it as the absolute truth, will not have an iota of happiness. They will keep suffering through the cycles. So what I desire is to take to the fourth state of life, that of the sannyasi, in order to liberate myself from the repeating cycle of samsara. Now when Shankara says something like this at the age of 8, many questions arise. Many questions arise. One of the questions that arises is that, is this allowed by the Shruti? Is this allowed by the Vedas? That right from brahmacharya, you are going into sannyasa. You have some responsibilities. You have some, you have a mother. You've still not entered the grihasthashram, and you are thinking of taking sannyasa. Is this allowed? So Shankara says, yes, it is allowed. In his commentaries, he mentions many statements from the Vedas where it is allowed. One such statement is from the Jabala Upanishad, which he often quotes, where it is said that there are two alternatives. One is to go in the sequence brahmacharya, grihastha, vanaprastha, and then sannyasa. That sequence is that one way. The other alternative is to take sannyasa from any stage of life. Not necessarily you go in the sequence only. And both alternatives are accepted by the Shruti. The only condition is that you must have vairagya. You must have vairagya. True vairagya. Not the kind of negative vairagya, but a true vairagya in which your only aim is to liberate yourself, is to attain that Brahma Vidya. You want to know yourself, the truth about yourself. So the moment you have this vairagya, you are allowed by the Veda to take sannyasa. Okay. But then there is an alternative view also, that you don't really need to take sannyasa. If you have inner vairagya, you can be in the grihasthashram also, like the great Raja Rishis of the old times. Raja Janak, Raja Ajatashatru, and Pravahan Jaivali, and so on and so forth, who are mentioned in the Upanishads. So that idea is, very well known in our Hinduism. That is true. One can do that. If one really does it, then it is fine. But what happens? In the name of pursuing moksha within grihastha ashram, people don't do anything. People rather remain entangled and attached in their relations. So we found out a convenient way of escaping, detachment, vairagya really. So there needs to be an ideal of sannyasa also in society. Both ideals are important. There needs to be an ideal of sannyasa also. The other ideal is also fine. And Shankara wanted to revive that ideal of sannyasa. Because if there is that ideal, then perhaps the grihastha ashram would also be motivated to develop vairagya over a course of time, and there will be less materialism, less attachment in society, and so on and so forth. So the ideal of sannyasa has its value. And as I said, that was the purpose of his life. But mother doesn't agree. Mother doesn't agree because mother being a mother, she doesn't agree. So then this symbolic story is presented in which Shankara is taking a bath in the river, and he is caught by a crocodile. So this being caught by a crocodile, what does it represent? It represents that the person is caught by the cycle of birth and death. Crocodile representing death. And death means punara janma, punarmrityu. So the cycle of birth and death he is caught in. And the mother's permission is needed to liberate himself. So now the onus is on the mother really to let go of the son. It becomes the mother's duty rather to save his son, you know, save his son literally from the crocodile and metaphorically from the cycle of birth and death. So this story is given, and so Shankara says, "O mother, give permission to me to become a sannyasin. I am sure the crocodile will then release me." So mother gives the permission, but she gives it the way a mother can. She says, if he lives, even be it as a sannyasin, I have a chance of seeing him at least once on some rare occasions. And if he dies, even that would not be possible. So, okay, Shankara, you take sannyasa. But remember, you come back when, in my last days, you come back and you perform my last rites. You promise me this. So, this pratigya his mother took. So Shankar promised his mother, and he says, Mother, when you think of me, I will give up all my work and come to you. Whether you think of me at day or night, or in between, whether you are conscious, unconscious, or burdened with sorrow, if you pass away, I will myself perform your last rites. You can trust me. So this was the whole episode, really. Now again, this returning of Shankara for mother's last rites is also questioned, and we will also look into it when we come to it. It is seen as a mark of attachment or a violation of sannyasa, but we will see that it was not really, that it has its own meaning, it has its own purpose. So we will see that when we come to it. But this is how Shankara's journey as a sannyasin began. The next chapter in his life was meeting his guru. Shankara went from Kalladi to the banks of Narmada river. The exact location of his guru's cave is not very well known. It is not really mentioned in the Digvijaya, but in the present times, the cave is maintained at Omkareshwar temple, just near Omkareshwar temple, which is near the Narmada river. So he goes in the search of Guru, and there he finds Guru Govinda. His Guru's name was Govinda. And when he meets his Guru, very, very wonderful introduction is given. So Guru sees this little boy and he says, "Who are you?" And Shankara says, "Revered sir, I am neither the earth, nor water, nor fire, nor air, nor sky, nor any of their properties. I am not the senses and the mind. I am Shiva, the divisionless consciousness." Now, when the ordinary person reads it, he doesn't get it. That is why also the Shiva avatar is important to, mention. But here he's talking about Brahma Gyan. He's talking about himself from the Brahma Gyan perspective. Here the word Shiva is referring to Brahman, and it invokes the same idea which we find in Shankara's Nirvana Shatakam, that I am not the mind, intellect, ahamkar, chitta, neither the ears, nor the tongue, nor nose, nor space, nor earth. I am Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. This is very well known. Now, here quite a few things need an explanation and elaboration. One is that from these words, it's very evident that Shankar is already, kind of enlightened. You know, it doesn't seem like he needs a guru or anything. He is already self-realized. It seems like that. But the Vedic tradition is that no matter how much you know about Atma and Brahman, you still need a guru. And only by the instruction of the guru will you finally clear the ignorance. This is again a very important idea for Shankara. He repeatedly mentions it in his commentaries. Acharyavan Purushah Veda, says Mundaka. So, only by the grace of the Guru, by the instruction of the Guru, do you achieve uh, the final liberating knowledge. So, that is one thing. Another thing that we need to understand here is, what is this meaning of Shivoham Shivoham? Those who have studied Vedanta will understand, but those who are new to it have to understand that it doesn't mean that this individual is Shiva. First of all, Shiva here means that pure consciousness, that Brahman. It is being called Shiva. Shiva means Mangala. Mangala means auspicious. Auspicious means that which is the best, the highest good, the absolute good. The absolute truth is the absolute good in our Vedanta. Why? Because only by the knowledge of the absolute truth do you get liberated from all suffering. So it is the absolute good. That is why we call it Shiva. So when Shankara says Shivoham, where is his aham? Aham is not in this body mind. That he has already negated in the first three lines. Aham has to be first, removed from the individual, and then you can say Shivoham Shivoham. You have to first surrender all that which is not you, all that which is not real, all that which is mithya. The first three lines are negation. Na iti, na iti, na iti. That is the method that Shankara prefers. Neti, neti. So first you have to negate all that which is not you. Then you have to recognize what really is that pure consciousness. Then you can say that I am. If you retain this individuality and say I am Brahman, then it is like what Hiranyakashyap said. Okay, that is not the vision. So very carefully we have to understand this statement. Only a true Jnani can say it in the proper manner. So the Guru is very pleased by his statement and he immediately accepts him. Because you see, this knowledge of Atma cannot be given to an ignorant person, a completely ignorant person. It can only be given to someone who knows a little bit, who has some vairagya, who has some vivek, who has a turning towards the absolute truth. Someone who doesn't have that awareness also, you cannot teach him. So the Guru sees that he is ready, he is paripakva, he is mature, and he teaches him through the statements of the Shruti. Now, of course, this webinar is too short to talk about these statements, but these are the Mahavakyas of the Upanishads, which contain the essence of their vision, and through them he is taught. And the Digvijaya says that Shankara becomes a Paramhans, which is the highest category of sannyasis, and he becomes very well versed with the Brahma Sutras and all the traditional texts of Vedanta. And then, of course, the Guru says, now you go and you teach others. You take this knowledge to others. He says that sannyasis don't stay at one place. Sannyasis are like the clouds. Clouds go from one place to the other, blessing everyone with the rains. In the same way, the sannyasi's job is to bless everyone with knowledge. So you go and you take this knowledge everywhere. So Shankara is sent to Varanasi. That is where he begins to teach. So from the Narmada, he goes to Varanasi. Now, Varanasi was the center of learning at that time. It was like the hub where all the scholars assembled of all the different schools of thought. And they engaged in discussions and debates. And really, if you wanted to meet the who's who of, the scholarship at that time, Varanasi was the place to be. So Shankara reaches there and he, of course, spends a lot of time in the worship of Lord Shiva, and a few disciples join him. Among them, there is one main disciple called Padmapad, uh, and he engages in debates with some schools of thought, and he, wins over them, and so on and so forth. Many incidents are narrated, when he is in Varanasi. One very important incident which I have taken for today's webinar is his confrontation with the outcast. Once he's going to the river with his disciples and he's confronted by an outcast, a Chandal. And this Chandal is standing there with 4 dogs. And Shankara looks at him and he says, "Move away, let us go. Move out of the way." So the Chandal smiles and he mocks him and he says, "Shankar, you are always going about preaching that the Vedas teach the non-dual Brahman. You're talking about non-duality, oneness. And if this is so, how has this sense of difference overtaken you? Now you suddenly see difference. So you asked me to move aside and make way for you. To whom were your words addressed, O learned sir? To the body, to this physical body, which comes from the same source and performs the same functions in the case of both a Brahmin and an outcast. So physical body is same. Or to the Atman, the witnessing consciousness, which too is the same, in all unaffected by anything that is of the body. So Atma is the same, physical body is the same. So where is the difference? He says, is the sun changed in the least if it reflects in a liquor pot or in the holy Ganga? And he then mocks him by saying, wonderful indeed is the magic of the great magician, which infatuates the ignorant and the learned alike. We say Parameshwara is a magician, Leeladhar. So, and his Leela is infatuating the ignorant people, that we know. But it seems that it is also infatuating the Gyanis, because they are also seeing differences. So Shankara immediately bows down before him. He says, all that you have said is true. You are indeed one of the noblest of men. Your words of wisdom make me abandon the idea that you are an outcast. So it is true that a jnani doesn't see any differences. He doesn't see the differences that society sees, but he does see the differences of inner purity and impurity. And he can see that he has purity within. So he immediately accepts that you are a pure person, you are a noble person. And he says, a person who sees the whole world as Atman is worthy of worship, irrespective of whether he is a Brahmana or an outcast by birth. A man established in such an awareness is indeed a guru to me. So you see, the work of an avatar or the work of an enlightened person is also to reform, is also to, correct a few wrongs. And this incident is perhaps an example of that. That Shankara wanted to say that the idea of Varna is not based on external factors like birth, but on inner purity only. And if you are pure within, you are a Brahmin. You are Brahmagyani. So, and we find this in his writings also, that in his commentaries also, he accepts this inner basis of Varna Vyavastha, not an external basis. So this is a very important incident. And then what happens? The Chandal vanishes from there, and in his place appears Lord Shiva. And the four dogs turn into the Vedas, meaning to say that, yes, this is the right vision. This is the right view of things. And then Lord Shiva says that, Shankara, now you are ready to write on the Vedas, on the Upanishads. Now you go and you write Bhashya, commentary on the Upanishads, on the Gita, and on the Brahma Sutra. So, in this manner, Shankar gets the permission to write his Bhashya. From Banaras, it is said that he went to Badrinath, Badrikashram. And there he met many scholars and many saints, learnt from them, discussed with them, and thereafter he wrote his commentaries there in Badrikashram. That cave is still maintained. And there he wrote. But again, on this point, there is some debate. There is some debate where exactly he wrote his commentaries. But according to the text that we are following today, he wrote it in Badrikashram. And after writing these commentaries, he came back to Varanasi and stayed there for a few more years. He wrote his commentaries when he was 12 years old. This is what the text says. Now, if you read his commentaries, and if a 12-year-old has written them, then, whatever has been said till now must all be true. Because, no 12-year-old can have that kind of knowledge. So anyways, he comes back to Banaras, and that's where he stays till he is 16. And at 16, he, has another incident which I will talk about. And he teaches his commentaries to people everywhere he goes. And the vision I have already shared with you. At the age of 16, he meets Vyasa, Vyasa. And again, mixing mythology with history. So Vyasa reads his commentaries, approves them, and he says, Shankara, you were supposed to live till 16 only. So Shankar says, fine, I think my work is done and I'm ready to depart. So he says, no, you're not ready to go. You live for another 16 years and you teach this to others. You take this knowledge to others. Because right now the karma kand is, on the rise. Jnana kand is being forgotten. So you take this knowledge to other people. So Shankara says, okay. And thereafter, he begins to interact with the Karma Kanda Vedas. And whoever has read about the story of Shankara may know that he had his most celebrated debate with Mandana Mishra. Mandana Mishra was the leader of all the ritualists, the ritual philosophy, the Purva Mimamsa philosophy of Vedas. And as they say, if you defeat the leader, you have defeated them all. So he goes to meet Mandana Mishra, who lived in Mahishmati. Mahishmati is again an old name for an old kingdom, again near the Narmada river. And there he meets Mandan and his wife Ubhay Bharati. And the the meeting of these great personalities is very interesting. When when he meets Mandan, Mandan is performing some Shraddha ritual, and Vyasa is there, and Jaimini is also there. Jaimini is the founder of Purva Mimamsa. So Vyasa and Jaimini both are there, founders of Purva Mimamsa and Uttara Mimamsa. And Mandan is performing some Shraddha ritual with them. And when he sees this little boy, sannyasi boy, he's very angry because he believed in Grihastha. He believed in Karma Kanda. So he's very agitated. He says, he gives him a lot of lecture. He says, you are ignoring the Vedic way of life and so on and so forth. Shankar very calmly listens to all that. And he replies, quoting from the Shruti, that sannyasa is also valid. And this goes on for a while. And then the two saints, Vyasa and Jaimini, they intervene. They say, Mandan, you are not recognizing who this is. And this is the great Shankaracharya. And he's a sannyasi, so you can't talk like this to a sannyasi. You have to welcome him. You have to offer him viksha. So then Mandana calms down. And but this initial interaction is very interesting to read because it presents a debate between Grihasthashram and Sannyasashram. Mandan gives the views on Grihasthashram, Shankar gives views on Sannyasashram, the need of both. So then, of course, Mandan is calmed down, he welcomes Shankara and he offers him Bhiksha. So Shankar says, no, I don't want Bhiksha of Anna today. Today I want Vada Bhiksha. I have come here for a debate because you are a karma kandi and I want to debate with you. So he agrees and he says, okay, Vyasa and Jaimini can be the judge and we can debate. So Vyasa says, no, we will not be the judges. You already have a very competent person with you, Ubhay Bharati, and she will be the judge. So the two men leave and Ubhay Bharati is the judge of the debate. And this debate goes on for many, many days. Of course, they take breaks for their daily duties, but ultimately, Shankara wins. A lot of people assemble around him whenever they used to debate. What was their main point of argument? The main point of argument was that Mandana Mishra used to believe that the whole purpose of the Veda is to talk about rituals only. Do this, don't do that. Do this, don't do that. Vidhi, Nishedh. If any sentence of the Veda does not give you instruction, then it is meaningless. So knowledge of Brahman and all is not there in the Veda. There is only instruction for meditation on Brahman. It's not about knowledge or anything. And he said, liberation, moksha, is not attained through knowledge. It is attained when you reach heaven by following the Vedic ritual. All these things the Mandana Mishra said. But Shankara, of course, was much more equipped, and he said that ignorance is the cause of our bondage. So only knowledge is the means of liberation. This is a very, very important idea of Shankara's philosophy, Jnanavad. We say Shankar was a Jnanavadin. So this statement from his Atma Bodha brings out his view very clearly. Avirodhitaya karma na avidyam vinivartayet vidya avidyayam nihantev tejastimir sanghavat. Means action cannot destroy ignorance because it is not opposed to it. What is opposed to ignorance? Only knowledge. So knowledge destroys ignorance just as light destroys deep darkness. So, Shankar's philosophy can be summarized in three words: Brahmavad, Jnanavad, and Sannyasavad. Only Brahman is real. Only through knowledge can you attain liberation. And sannyasa is the natural consequence of vairagya. So, these are the three main tenets of his philosophy. So we find that they mainly debated on these three ideas, and of course Shankara wins. But Ubhay Bharati does not uh, give the judgment yet. She says, yes, you have won over Mandan to some extent, but still I am there. I am the better half of my husband. So to defeat him completely, you have to first defeat me also. She says, you have not gained complete success over my renowned husband, as I am his better half. Before you make him your disciple, you have to defeat me also in debate. And although you are the master of all learning and are an embodiment of divinity, nonetheless, I have a desire to debate with you. Ubhay Bharati is presented as an avatar of Devi Saraswati herself. When we read the Digvijaya, they give a backstory that some incident happened because of which Devi Saraswati had to take a birth as a human. And this was Ubhay Bharati. And it was said that one day when a sannyasi comes to your doorstep asking for Vada Bhiksha, then you debate with him. Then you will be relieved from the human form. So she needed to debate with him to relieve herself from the human form. So that is why she asks him for a debate. And again, they also debate for many days. It is said they debate for 17 days. And then Ubhay Bharati plays a trick. She says, Shankara, tell me about the Kusumastra Shastra. The Kusumastra Shastra, which is essentially about the relationship between a man and a woman. Now, Shankara, being a sannyasi, had no knowledge about it. And if he replied anything about it, he would be breaking a, kind of a vow of sannyasa. So, and if he said that he does not know, then Mandana Mishra wins and Advaita Vedanta remains you know, I mean, Advaita Vedanta has not conquered all. So he's in a dilemma. So he says, okay, give me some time, give me a month's time, and let me prepare myself. I don't know anything about this subject matter because I am a sannyasi. So let me prepare myself and I will come back. So the story goes that Shankara enters the body of a king. Again, symbolic, all symbolic. I'll tell you the meaning behind it. Shankara enters the body of a king, King Amaruka, and who had 100 wives. And there he lived for a month. And he learnt about the Kusumastra Shastra. He studied many texts on the subject. He even wrote a text, it is said, called Amaruka on the subject. And but 1 month passes away and he still doesn't return. So his disciples get worried. His disciples get worried because they were guarding his original body. So they go in search for him and they reach the king's court. They are all disguised as musicians. They all take a disguise of musicians, and there they see Shankar as the king. So they sing a song for him. And in the song, they sing that how the Atma or the soul forgets about its true nature and gets trapped in the body. So remember your true self. Tattvamasi, Tattvamasi, you are that, you are not this, you are that. This is the song that they sing. And then Shankar remembers, oh, I am not this. And then he goes back. So the idea here is they are trying to say that how we forget about our truth and we get entangled in the physical existence. We get entangled in the material life. So we need to be reminded of our truth by a guru, by the words of the Shruti, by a statement like Tattvamasi. We need to be reminded of our truth and then we will be released. So that is the part of the story that people don't generally talk about. That is the deeper meaning here. So then Shankar goes back and he gives an explanation of whatever was asked. And then Ubhay Bharati says, you are really something. You win and we accept defeat. And with this, Ubhay Bharati transforms into Devi Saraswati. And she gives him a promise. She says that wherever you will invoke me, I will, arrive there and I will live there. I give you this boon. So Shankar received this boon from Devi Saraswati, which he will make use of later on. So in this manner, Shankar won over Mandana Mishra, who became Sureshwara, one of his main disciples. So we have Padmapad from Varanasi and Sureshwara from Mahishmati. About Shankara, one very common idea is that Shankar doesn't care about bhakti. Shankar was a Jnanavadi, great Jnani, Nirgun Brahman. So he doesn't care about bhakti and all. But we don't see that in his writings. Rather, we see a very big bhakta. We see a devotee. And from his story also we see the same. We see that he went to many temples. He went to Sri Shailam, where he worshipped Mallikarjuna. For many days he worshipped there. And then he went to Gokarna, and near Gokarna he visited many temples. One of the great temples he visited was the temple of Hari Shankar. Hari Shankara is an embodiment of both Vishnu and Lord Shiva, amalgamation of both Lord Vishnu and Lord Shiva together. It's an important incident, I feel, because at that time the Vaishnavas and the Shaivas, they were really opposed to each other in many parts of India. So we see that he had this spirit of synthesizing, of bringing together, you know, the different schools of thought also. Because in his Nirgun Brahman, both Lord Shiva and Lord Vishnu become one. Duality creates divisions. Non-duality removes the divisions. It synthesizes. And so that is again something very interesting. And there he wrote a hymn. He wrote a prayer which is mentioned in the Shankara Digivjaya. It's about 10 or 11 verses. I'm not mentioning it here today because just to explain one verse of that hymn will take an hour. Because each verse is equally applicable to Lord Shiva and to Lord Vishnu. That's the flexibility and beauty of Sanskrit language, that the words can be used in many different ways. The same words, when read in a certain manner, apply to Lord Shiva. Same words, when read in another manner, apply to Lord Vishnu. So look at the beauty of this. The Shabda of the Shruti, which is revealing the Brahman, is equally applicable to Lord Vishnu, equally applicable to Lord Shiva, equally applicable to Devi, whomsoever you worship. So his journey continues in this manner, and he comes to Sringeri. Sringeri is where he establishes a temple. He invokes Devi Saraswati over there. Devi Saraswati had given him the boon, so there he invokes Devi Saraswati because it is a tapo bhumi. It is considered a great. It was considered a great place where Rishi Shringa had done tapasya for many years. Traditionally, one other story is told, which is not mentioned in the Digvijaya, but traditionally it is more popular. That when Shankara reached Sringeri, he saw that a snake is giving shelter to a frog, and a frog is giving birth, and snake is giving shelter to the frog. So he saw such harmony, such friendliness between two creatures who are naturally opposed to each other. So he said, "This is the perfect place to invoke Devi." So there he invoked Devi Sharada, and he established the temple, which is till date there, and the matha is also there around it. And this verse is very important in the Digvijaya. It is recited regularly. Ya Sharada Ambe Ityabhidham Vahanti Kritam Pratigya Pratipalayanti Adyapi Shringeri Pure Vasanti Pradyotate Bhishta Varan Dishanti. Means that Devi Sharada, Devi in the form of Mother Sharada, protects everyone in accordance with her assurance to Shankara. She made the pratigya to Shankara, and according to that, she lives there and protects everyone, and who even today dwells in Sringeri, granting all wishes of her devotees. So we see Shankara as a devotee also. See, for him, belief in Nirgun Brahman didn't mean that he is opposed to Sagun Brahman, or he saw Sagun Brahman as an obstruction of any kind. Rather, he saw Saguna Brahman as a medium of taking one to the Nirguna Brahman. and he was very much a devotee. Shankar is also a great guru. That is why we say Shankaracharya. And he had four main disciples who are generally pictured along with him. Whenever we see his pictures, he is surrounded by four Shishyas. And their names were Padmapad, Sureshwara, Hastamalaka, Totaka. I'm not going into the stories of each of these people. Of course, Sureshwara we have seen as Mandana, but other stories are also mentioned, uh, which we cannot go into today because we have very limited time. But read about them, they are very interesting stories. And it is said that each of these students went on to become the head of each of the mathas which were established. Now, the Digvijaya doesn't really explain or talk about this completely. It doesn't mention who got which matha, who went where. It is not mentioned in the Digvijaya. But traditionally, it is believed that Padmapad got Govardhan Matha, Sureshwara, because he was most well-read, most scholarly, he got Sringeri Matha. Hastamalaka got the Dwarka Matha, and Totaka got the Badrikashram Matha. So this was, how it is. This is how traditionally it is believed to be. If you go to these mathas, they give you this lineage only. And I have also mentioned their principal text, which one can read. They are all wonderful texts on Vedanta. They are studied by any serious scholar of Vedanta must definitely get into them. Uh, Totaka, Totaka Ashtakam, which is mentioned under Totaka, is a very beautiful verse in praise of his guru. It's a story wonderfully told that when Shankar favored Totaka the most, perhaps. So the disciples were very jealous of him. So, Totaka recited this verse for Shankara, and then the disciples understood why he is his favorite. So Totaka, the verses that he recited is the Totaka Ashtakam. So it is in the praise of the Guru, but rest of the texts mentioned here are about Vedantic philosophy. Then, as Shankar was going about, he has a vision one day in which he sees that his mother is in her last moments. So he goes back to them. He goes back to her, keeping his promise. Now, this return, as I said, is looked down upon by many people. It was looked down upon even then when Shankar had gone back. But, it was not out of attachment or anything. It was simply to facilitate the liberation of a pious lady. See, there are some people who are very pure, who are very noble, but are unable to attain the knowledge of Nirgun Brahman. You know, so for them, the northern path, the Uttar Marga, is talked about. The Krama Mukti is talked about. So to facilitate that, Shankar had gone back to his mother. Because that is the job of the sannyasi. Wherever a person needs help in liberation, that is where the sannyasi needs to be. So when Shankar comes back to his mother, he says that, "Oh mother, be not sad. I am by your side. Please tell me your heart's desire." So she says, "It is indeed my great good fortune that I could meet you now, Shankara. What more can I want?" I do not have desire to continue to live on with this old and decrepit body. You see that you see that I attain to my highest evolution and then cremate my body according to the rules of the Shastras. So she says that you make sure that I attain moksha. Now the story goes that Shankar first tells her about Nirguna Brahman. So she says, no Shankar, I don't understand your Nirgun Brahman. Tell me about Sagun Brahman. So Shankar tells her about Lord Shiva. So she gets scared of the Ganas of Lord Shiva. So she says, no, don't tell me about Lord Shiva. He scares me. Tell me about Lord Vishnu. So he tells her about Lord Vishnu. This is how it is mentioned in the Digvijaya. And Lord Vishnu's form is very pleasing for her, and she's able to, be absorbed in that form, and she's able to peacefully leave her body, completely absorbed in Vishnu's form. And so, this indicates that, Shankar facilitated Krama Mukti for Devi Aryamba. And it also shows the diversity of the Vedantic traditions is for a reason, because not everyone uh, finds the same deity appealing. Different people, different devatas, different ishta devatas. So that was the reason why Shankar had gone back. Of course, one can have one's own perspective on the matter, that is totally fine. But this is how we are traditionally this is how we are traditionally told about it. Then, of course, Shankara's yatra continues, and from Kaladi he went back to Gokarna. From Gokarna he went to Dwarka, to Ujjain, Varanasi, Kamarupa. Everywhere he went, it is said that he traveled all across India many times. And wherever he went, he met scholars of different schools of thought. Some of the names are mentioned here. These are the names mentioned in the Digvijaya. And he basically was opposed to the dualistic traditions, the dualistic Shaivas, the dualistic Vaishnavas, because they were creating the divides. They were really not in line with the Shruti, according to Shankara, not in line with the Vedic vision of oneness. So his main aim was to, speak against them, or to make them see the view of oneness. And he was also against the left-handed, the Vama Marga of Tantra, which engaged in certain debased practices, as I mentioned in the beginning. So there are many stories given, many very dramatic kind of encounters with the Kapalikas. One story goes that a Kapalika comes and asks for Shankar's head, because Kapalikas used to worship Lord Shiva with human heads. They used to cut a human head and offer that to Lord Shiva, and that is why they were called Kapalika. Kapalika means human skull. So, so Shankar says, fine, you take my head, I don't mind. And the Kapalika is very pleased that today I will worship Lord Shiva with a Jnani's head. Lord Shiva will be very pleased with me. Of course, he is unsuccessful in doing so, which is to show that the Jnani doesn't identify with the body. you know so this happens, and then another incident happens in which a whole army of Kapalikas attack Shankara's party, and then Shankara invokes Lord Shiva and they are all destroyed. So these kinds of dramatic incidents are also mentioned in his story. uh, basically the left-handed tantra, he did not accept. The right-handed tantra, he accepted, he synthesized it with the Vedic vision, he considered it in line with the Vedic vision, and therefore the Hinduism which is followed today is a synthesis of the right-handed tantra and Vedanta based on the Upanishads. And in his Digvijay Yatra, he finally goes to Kashmir. In Kashmir, there was a Devi temple, a Devi Sharada temple, which is still there, I believe. Uh, and there, the story goes that that temple had four gates on each side: north, west, east, and south. Only a person who was a complete Shastragya, who had knowledge of all the Shastras and all the Vedas and everything, was capable of opening one of the gates of this temple of Devi Sharada. So the north, west, and east gates had already been opened by scholars from these three parts of India. But the southern gate was still closed. The southern gate was still closed. So Shankara said that if this gate remains closed, then people may think that there is no scholar in the south, you know, and nobody in the south knows about the Vedas. They will think that. So I need to represent the southern people here, and I need to open this gate for them. So there he engaged. He had to prove himself. He had to prove that he really was worthy of opening that gate. And there were many discussions and all that. At the end, Devi Saraswati herself tests Shankara, and then he opens the gates. So, very, very important uh, point is this going to this Devi Sharada temple. Finally, uh, it is said that Shankar came back to Kedar, where he attained Siddhi. Siddhi means departure from the physical body, what we can say death. So he came back to Kedar, where he left his body, according to Shankara Digivjaya. There are different views on this. The Kanchi Matha, which is the fifth Matha, believes that Shankar may have gone to Kedar, but he left his body in Kanchi. And there are a couple of other theories also. But the Digvijaya mentions that he came to Kedar, which I feel is very apt because Shankar, being an avatar of Shankar, went to the land of Shankar and merged into Shankar. You know, it's like he went back where he came from. So it is very symbolic in that sense. And just to think about it, I feel fills you with a lot of wonder and a lot of awe. So this is how, we say that he attained his Siddhi. Of course, his story continues through the legacy he left. Because if he had not come, uh, sannyasa dharma would have perhaps gone away totally. Even today, very few take sannyas or think about sannyas. Uh, but at least it is still alive through the mathas and through the different ashramas and acharyas which have followed them, like the Arshavidya Gurukul in Rishikesh. So he had an impact, definitely. And through his writings, he wrote innumerable works. Just before the start of the webinar, uh, Poonamji was saying that if we just take the names of Shankara's writings, it may take us 2 hours, which is true because there's so many works attributed to him. Of course, authenticity of many of these works is doubted by scholars, but tradition takes them all as authentic, particularly the first three here, Upanishad, Brahma Sutra, and Bhagavad Gita Bhashya, as well as Upadesha Sahasri. Nobody doubts their authenticity. But apart from these, people doubt and debate and all that. But for tradition, it is all authentic. So, I mean, I have just given a glimpse of the works which one can explore. These are the main ones. Prayer verses, of course, are too many to mention. You can, I mean, there is a whole collection of Shankara's collected writings which one can read. After the webinar today, on the email, I will be sharing some links and some resources with you all on Shankara Digivjaya, on Shankara's writings, and a few other things I'll be sharing, as well as this presentation. So you can explore his writings and you can read more about his life. But hopefully, we have covered all the main highlights of his life and his journey. And just before I close, I'll just share with you that Swami Tapasyananda of Ramakrishna Matha has very nicely summarized all those points on which there is consensus about Shankara's life and all those points on which there is debate. So for any scholar of Shankara's life, this is very helpful. You can read it. I have already mentioned these points while talking about the story. You can read all these points. So from this, you can, have a complete historical picture also. The mythology is important because it reveals some deeper ideas. But if you are a student of history, then this may help you.